It's a pleasure to be here, and the Test of Time talk was a good intro for this. I have two disclosures. I have co-founded two companies, and I'm a shareholder and board member of one of them, Empatica, which is Italian for empathetic, and also a shareholder of Smart IAB, which acquired Affectiva, another one of the companies I co-founded. Today's story starts when I was a computer vision researcher, a junior faculty at MIT, thinking about perception, not just building algorithms that tried to interpret the content of images, but algorithms that were inspired by what we were learning about what was happening in the human brain, which was an old convergence area at what used to be called NeurIPS in the early days, where the brain science and the algorithm people would come together and talk about this. And we merged our computer vision efforts with people doing audition. And we thought about olfaction, we thought about perception in general. And I was curious, and I would read deeply about neurology and what was going on in the brain. And one day I read a book about synesthesia, where some people have a mixing of the senses. They might taste a particular flavor and feel a shape in their hand. And as I learned more about the parts of the brain involved in this union of the senses, I was surprised to learn that this was not happening in the cortex, which was what all of the computational people thought was where intelligence was and what we should be modeling. Instead, there were key regions deep in the brain that were projecting about 5 times as much information up to the cortex as vice versa. And these older limbic regions were known for being involved with emotion, memory, and attention. Now, at the time, there were very few women in the field, and I didn't want to touch emotion. I figured that was what made people irrational, and I wanted to stay away from that. But I knew memory and attention were important, so I kept learning about the brain. And to my, horrors, really, I kept finding more and more important roles that emotion was playing, not just in perception, but in every single topic that AI researchers were working on at the time, which included decision-making, reasoning, action selection, language, and much more. And so I wrote a paper on it, which was rejected. And so I wrote a longer paper, and I turned it into a book. Books don't go through peer review, they just go through editing. It was impossible to get papers published in the early days. Conferences said it didn't fit. But I found more and more evidence that I thought this would be important for intelligence to handle things like recognizing the information people were sending to the computer, responding to that in an intelligent way, handling human emotions in an intelligent way. And if the machine, if a GAI or an AGI, whatever, in the future would have true intelligence, it would need to have mechanisms, I believe, that are similar to some of the mechanisms that shape our flexible and intelligent ways to deal with complex, unpredictable inputs. Now, people express emotion in a lot of different ways to computers, and I give this example that my student Natasha Jakes had made years ago, just to illustrate that in my mind, computing is in just about everything now. So when I say a computer, it doesn't have to be a big network of GPUs. It can be something very lean as well. I want to play for you a historical example of the very first time I saw a machine sense and respond to expressed affective information. And this was in the doctoral work of Cynthia Brazil, who's now a professor and head of the Personal Robots Group at MIT. The Kismet robot. Listen to the tone of voice of the person talking to it. Kismet was trained on patterns of pitch changes there, and to classify them and to try to respond in a way that is emotionally smart.
So another important skill for the robot to be able to learn from people is being able to recognize communicative intent. Very good, Kismet. And the way we've done that with Kismet right now is to have the robot recognized by tone of voice. Yes. Are you praising it? Are you scolding it?
Where'd you put your body? No. No. You're not to do that. No.
Now, we know now we can reprimand a language model, and it's polite if it's trained on polite human speech. We still have a ways to go with the physical world responding to us in ways that are dignifying for the human experience. While trying to build some of the first algorithms that could teach a computer to recognize that a person was frustrated with it, because that was the usual affective state that people were experiencing toward their machines, one young man came to me and he said, "You're teaching computers to recognize emotion. Can you help my brother?" I said, "Tell me about your brother." And he started telling me about his brother's autism. Now, not all people with autism have trouble reading facial expressions or emotional tone, but many of them have super sensory abilities, and facial expressions alone are complex. There are about 10,000 patterns of movements that can happen on a face. Tito Mukhopadhyay, an autistic man, wrote, "Faces are like waves, different every moment. Could you remember a particular wave you saw in the ocean?" Temple Grandin, another renowned academic on the autism spectrum, talked about how she could understand simple, strong, extreme, universal emotions, but was stumped by the more complex emotions and the games people play. She has to compute others' intentions and states of mind to try to make algorithmic explicit what for the rest of us is second nature. So we set out to do this kind of understanding also early on. And I'm going to use chess as an example to compare it to, even though what I'm comparing is also vastly more complex than Go. But chess, everybody gets 20 opening moves, 20 counter moves, 400, and then this quickly explodes, but has been nicely solved in a lot of cases with AI. But if we compare the facial moves, the games people play with their face, if you've got 10,000 on one expression and 10,000 on the other, you're quickly at 100 million after one move. And you don't have minutes to respond. You have milliseconds to respond. And this can carry on, and it's not just the face that people are using. We add speech, we add gesture, we add other contextual nuance, and this becomes extraordinarily complex to develop emotional intelligence. This was some of the work that Rana El-Khalioumi and I set out to do in developing machine learning to process facial movements and to interpret those. And today, this kind of technology is in use by more than a quarter of the Fortune 500 companies, and it's being put into a lot of different kinds of robots that interact with people. It's also nicely been put into different forms of wearables that are able to help people in the wild walk up to people, read the face, and give them real-time interpretation of, oh, they're nodding, they're shaking, they look like they're smiling and happy. People who are seeing impaired have also expressed a desire to know what's happening on the face of those around them. So this is now advanced in ways that are helping improve human lives. It's also advanced the science in really interesting ways. For example, when I first learned about facial affect, I thought I was told by neurology experts that when you activated not just the lip corner pull, but the cheek raise, that meant you were truly happy. That was the true smile of delight. Action Unit 6 and 12. We like to gather real data, and in our lab, our students made an experiment where they deliberately frustrated people. Here's a clip from this. We didn't tell him that we used impossible CAPTCHAs, so he thinks he's just going to give us usability feedback on an experience putting his resume online.
I am sorry. You seem to be having difficulties getting through this form. Would you mind looking at the camera and share your thoughts on how to improve the form?
This one sucks.
So we actually have a lot of protocols for frustrating people. This next person is doing the same thing, but watch his facial expression. Look for the smile, lip corner pull, and cheek raise. There, see that? So we learned that not only, and I'm just going to play it again because it goes really fast, look for the lip corner pull and cheek raise. All right, so he's showing this quote unquote true smile of happiness, but he's not happy. In fact, 90% of people showed this during frustration in our study. Now, interestingly, when you show a bunch of these videos without a lot of context around them to humans and you train a machine learning model on them, the machine learning model and the humans are about equal on the smiles that come from delight. And the machines initially were much better on the ones that came from frustration. I think in part because people's prior probability, their expectation of the smile with frustration was just not there. In fact, many people with autism are taught that smile means happy. And then when the boss smiles, when they're frustrated at them, they get fired. And that's really bad. So I hope we will all leave here today at least having learned that smiles don't necessarily mean happy. Facial expressions, while some of them can be very easy to recognize, have a lot of complexity associated with them. As we worked with people on the autism spectrum, and I have another big message today, and that is please work with the people that you think you're building your technology for, in this case, lived experts on the autism spectrum. I was told that I had it all wrong. I was told that the one particular friend said to me, Roz, this work you're doing trying to help recognize other people's emotions, I don't need that at all. She said, my biggest problem is not recognizing other people's emotions. My biggest problem is you're not recognizing my emotion. I felt like crap. I felt so low that I'll lose the microphone if I go down and show you. And I said, I'm so sorry. What am I not recognizing? And she said, it's not just you, it's everybody is not recognizing my emotions, our emotions. Many of us have different ways of expressing. I realized that we had been measuring lots of things in the lab, but we hadn't heard what was most important to many people on the spectrum. And she said the biggest thing she needed help with was having stress recognized. She said people were misunderstanding her stress. As we met with other people, we realized this was a very big and common problem. Here's a little boy who looks very stressed. We all know that we're pretty good at hiding stress. People have very atypical ways of showing it. Some people are completely unaware of their stress. Everybody around them sees it, but they might not. And so we started to build take our physiological measurement that was in big pieces of electronics in the lab and make new miniature electronics and wireless sensing and put it in wearable forms. So unlike the previous comment that, all the data on the internet is all there is, actually there is an explosion of data happening now with wearables and medicine, and I expect to see this continue to grow. With the particular signal known as electrodermal activity that measures the sympathetic fight or flight response, and that's oversimplified. It's actually much more interesting than that. We built the first sensor that could leave the lab and go out on the wrist and continuously collect this data 24/7 to try to help people understand and communicate this particular aspect of their stress. Here, what you see from top to bottom is the first data from the wrist over 7 days, top to bottom, 24 hours left to right. And higher is more skin conductance, more of an electrodermal response. And I've highlighted in red here where the students said they were studying. Now, we would expect that when you are cognitively loaded, when you're engaged, when you're making a great mental effort, that your skin conductance response would go up. To the embarrassment of we MIT professors, this yellow region on the right was the low point of the day for just about everybody, and that was classroom activity. We had hoped it would be engaging, but it was flat. Another big surprise was this is really big during sleep. Now, is this somebody who's sweating a lot during sleep or having nightmares? No, it turns out this is a general phenomenon during sleep that is associated with non-REM activity, and we now think with memory formation and learning of what matters during sleep. We know that these signals tend to go up with things that really matter to people. So we built this. It went in a wearable band. You see a little sweatband shown here. And one day, a student in the lab knocked on my door, and he said, Professor Picard, my little brother has autism. He can't talk. I wonder if I could borrow a sensor and measure him over the Christmas break. And I said, sure. In fact, don't just take one, take two, because they were hand-built and they were always breaking. Do you need a soldering iron? No, he's got a soldering iron. Great, he'll fix it. Meanwhile, during the break, I'm back in the lab looking at the boys' data that has gone up onto the network. And the first day looks pretty chill. The next day, pretty chill. It looks like, unfortunately, like classroom activity. And then I go to the next day, and the electrodermal activity on one side, turns out he had put it on both wrists at the same time, on one side went through the roof so high that I thought the sensor must be broken. I'm an electrical engineer by training, and I know how to debug the electronics, but nothing explained this gigantic response that did not actually look like a hardware malfunction. And meanwhile, the other side was flat. So I'm scratching my head thinking, how on earth can a person be stressed on one side of their body and not the other? After unsuccessfully debugging this myself, I resorted to old-fashioned debugging. I picked up the phone and called him at home on vacation. Hi, sorry to bug you on vacation. Any idea what happened to your little brother on this date and time in the data? And he said, I don't know, I'll check the diary. I thought, diary? MIT student keeps a diary. He comes back, he has the exact date and time written down, and he says, that was right before he had a grand mal seizure. Now, I didn't know what a seizure was. I'd kind of heard of it, but let me actually show you what that is. Here is an example of a giant peak, the skin conductance. And remember how I said sleep is usually the biggest peak of the day? Here are these little things, are the person's sleep. So what is a seizure? Many of you may not be familiar with this, but you're all probably familiar with EEG, electrical electrodes on the scalp that read off electrical activity, and in a healthy brain, you get these traces of normal electrical activity. If you have like a little brush fire electrically in a portion of the brain, that is a focal seizure, and you'll see these unusual activity patterns emanating from that region of the brain. If that little brush fire spreads and takes over electrically and causes the whole brain to respond in this atypical way, then that is a generalized seizure. It generalizes across all the EEG channels. That knocks you out, you lose consciousness, you convulse, and I learned it is associated with death and epilepsy. Now, a long time ago, people usually weren't told about this. Fortunately, the risk is low, but it is now recognized as the #2 and may even be the #1 cause of all years of potential life loss of neurological disorders, above Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, meningitis, encephalitis, and more. There's SUDEP, a sudden unexpected death in epilepsy, every 7 to 9 minutes. That's several while we've been sitting here for this last session and this session. And they're about 5 times deadlier if you're alone. So learning this, I realized that I needed to go on a little bit of a detour in our work. And so we worked with Children's Hospital Boston to collect gold standard medical data, EEG, video, electrodermal activity, and ECG around the clock. And Ming-Zur Po did his PhD with us, building a lean machine learning system that used 2 of the continuous signals, time series analysis, to detect whether or not there was the most life-threatening kind of seizure here. This work was then improved on and commercialized by Empatica, which made the Embrace, which is the one of the earliest examples of a AI technology that was cleared by the FDA. The FDA doesn't approve devices usually, they clear devices, but you have to go through as much paperwork as if you were getting a drug approved in order to say that the device is FDA cleared. It's a significant amount of work. So that was a huge amount of work. Now, one morning, I was at home reading my email when I got a message that led to this story. The mom was, her daughter was wearing an early version of our device that was designed to detect seizures. The daughter was in bed, she thought sleeping. The mom went and took a shower, and she had her phone on the corner, on the counter next to her while she's taking the shower, and the phone went off and indicated her daughter might be having a seizure. She ran out of the shower to her daughter's bedroom and found her face down in bed, blue and not breathing. She repositioned her daughter. The first thing you should do when you find somebody having a seizure is turn them on their side, make sure there's nothing in their airway. You do not have to hold their tongue, just put them in a safe position. And the daughter took a breath and another breath, and she was fine. Her color came back. Now, I think I turned white reading this. Oh no, I said, the device is not perfect, the battery could break, the Bluetooth could break. She said, no, I know, it's okay, no technology is perfect, but this just saved my daughter's life. I said, actually, no, it got you there in time to save your daughter's life. We have learned that people who have these life-threatening events really want a person there. Ideally, if the technology could stop the seizure and protect them, that would be awesome. There's work on this, but right now, even the implants don't look that promising for that. People still want somebody there. We want human intelligence there to take care of us at that moment. I'll ask you when you leave here today, I'm going to take a show of hands actually. How many of you know somebody that has seizures, that has epilepsy? It's 1 in 26. This is a good audience. You guys have a higher raise of hands than most. For those of you who didn't raise your hand, I bet you do know somebody and they haven't told you. So your homework, if I may ask you, over the holidays is to ask who you know who has epilepsy. It is a condition that can affect anybody with a brain. Everybody here could get it. And it is stigmatized, and we should stop stigmatizing it. So please talk about it and make sure that you find out who you know who has it and let them know that they shouldn't be alone if they have this kind of most dangerous seizure that generalizes and causes them to lose consciousness and shake. Now, through this work, we had a bunch of super interesting scientific connections that arose that I would have never expected. I knew about regions of the brain, like the amygdala, from studying emotion in the brain. I knew that it was important for things like signaling meaning, and we think maybe for helping label what might be, label is a strong word, but weight what might be most important to remember in a learning system at night. We don't want to keep everything. Our brains would overload. So it was fascinating to learn that if you go in and working with doctors who could open up the head and you stimulate the right amygdala, you get a right skin conductance response and very little on the left. And if you do that on the left, you get a left one and very little on the right. It was not contralateral, it was ipsilateral, but it was lateralized. And this is true for other regions of the brain too. They're lateralized and they sometimes they're bilateral, sometimes they're ipsilateral, sometimes they're contralateral. And there's a lot more interesting information in here than we originally expected. Originally, we just thought, hey, we're just getting the fight or flight arousal response. Turns out there's a lot more interesting stuff that this wearable can give. Christy Johnson has written this paper I can refer you to, doing a short review of a lot of the interesting areas where the wearables with the signal have very interesting potential medical uses. And today, this sweatband wearable that then became the FDA-cleared Embrace sensor is now a real smartwatch running lots of different kinds of custom AI and over 100 digital biomarkers, but with still long battery life you can tune, and in over 100 sponsored phase 1, 2, and 3 trials. So with more than 5 FDA clearances now. So this is just still the beginning, I think, of a medical revolution where wearables are going to start showing us, even through peripheral information, some of what is going on deep in our brains. With that and with behavior and other information that we can start to model with AI. We are starting to make progress on things like forecasting migraines, forecasting seizures, and other health conditions. Our sensors are even being used in a long COVID study, listening to Ian's comment earlier. So please tell your friends who might have epilepsy about this study, an opportunity to help contribute to the AI being developed. And of course, as you know, if you contribute your training data, it's more likely to work well for you. All right, some other examples I want to zip through a little bit about the past, and then I want to move into some of my concerns about new things and ideas about fixing those. Very quickly, we've been working a lot lately on mental health. This no longer needs an introduction of why it's gotten so bad and how it tripled during the pandemic. I heard, too, that many years ago when I was talking to the leadership of Google, that it was the #1 problem of Googlers. The people who have every perk on the planet were suffering the most mental health issues. We have been working with lots of different kinds of measures, wearable, smartphone, other physiological data, and using time series analysis on that to estimate the severity of your depression symptoms here in partnership with MGH. The diagonal line would be perfect. This was some super nice results we got early on in this work. Since then, we've gotten much harder cases. The results aren't quite as nice, but we're working on building personalized models that are trained on the group, on people like you. We're also interested in giving you the ability to predict what you're doing and how it might affect you tomorrow. What in your sleep and your behavior could you change that might affect an improvement in your stress or health tomorrow? And also looking at future work here. This work was not causal inference, it was just association, but we really need to do a lot more work on causal inference with this wearable time series analysis so that we can help give people real things they can change and then run the N of 1 randomized control trials to do that. All right, I'm going to shift gears a little bit now. That was a little bit of some highlights of work in affective computing that have been happening that illustrates some of the points I'm going to try to make next. With the optimizing of what matters, I just picked this schematic of how a lot of machine learning works, right? And at the end of it is the deploying of the model and the applications. And I've highlighted some applications. I haven't really gone into detail, but in each of those, there are optimizations, such as optimizing the sensitivity and specificity of a seizure detector so that you minimize the number of false alarms, but get somebody there in a potentially life-threatening situation. Usually optimization happens here where we're we're architecting the model and we're figuring out what the optimal function we want to tune is. Is it just minimizing some error function? Is it maximizing some reward function? One of my favorites, I'll call out this work by Natasha Jakes, who's now at UW, was to modify the reward objective function with a penalty term for the KL divergence of how far the generated dialogue was from the pre-trained model. Sound familiar? Yes, this is cited in multiple of the early OpenAI papers. Of course, we don't know if it's actually in the latest version of ChatGPT because that's not, because while it's AI, it's not open. So we'll figure out about the nomenclature. Also, I just want to say how much I am thrilled to see how many people in this community and in the world have embraced the need to do a better job with the smart data curation, and not just bringing in fairness and reducing bias and getting rid of a lot of the toxicity and things that are important there, but also paying people who contribute the valuable data, the artists, the journalists, and others. I really encourage you to think hard about optimizing, doing the right thing up front about how you're getting your data as well. There's a problem today, and that is that some, not all, some of them are wonderful, sharing things, but some are really hindering good research practice by not disclosing what was used in training. Subsequently, students and researchers use test data that they didn't know was in the training data. It's worse than a little data leakage. One of my colleagues at MIT who was upset to see so much of this going on said, Roz, use this quote in your NeurIPS talk. So here is this quote. Never attribute to malevolence what can be attributed to incompetence. Hopefully, this generation, I think sometimes when a group gets so large, we don't teach the next generation as well as they need to know about the importance of knowing what's in the training data. Now, if there are confidentiality issues there are ways to deal with protecting the privacy while also validating for people whether their test data is not in the training data. Another problem that concerns me today, and I raise some of these hoping that we will have a conversation about them as we think about how to optimize what matters, is that it's becoming harder and harder for people in industry and small businesses to build and test the largest models because of costs, well known. Subsequently, you see companies now locking down what they're sharing, in particular the big ones. Now the marketing department is determining what performance information gets released. And of course, after you put billions into it, you want to present only the best stuff. But when you retrain the model and the stuff you're presenting comes out great, some other stuff usually gets worse. And if you don't disclose what's getting worse, then that causes people a lot of other problems, right? Because you fixed this, but you broke all these other things over here. So I think we need to be calling for more integrity in this process. I'm not quite sure the optimal set of incentives to do this, but certainly funding independent testing and innovation is important. There's a lot of great work at NeurIPS. I wish I had time to list it all here. One that I saw is being presented at 4:30 today. I didn't warn them of this, Tim Althoff and group, but they ablated the LLM in their time series forecasting, and they got better results, right? You're not going to get the company pushing the LLM to publish a result like that. But we need to be looking at these alternative, leaner, more energy efficient, and better performing models in some cases, and really understanding what's going on. So please, if you're an investor pumping tons of money into these huge companies, make sure you pump a bunch of it also into the people doing the work that helps us understand what's honestly and transparently going on. This really caught my eye. Sunday, there's a workshop on safety saying, is your paper being reviewed by an LLM, investigating AI text detectability and peer review? The team at Intel says that their work reveals the difficulty of accurately identifying AI-generated text at the individual review level, highlighting the urgent need for new tools and methods to detect this type of unethical application of generative AI. Think about it. Some person is trying to save time and they're resorting to an unethical practice, presenting work as true that they did, that they didn't actually do. It's costing lots of other people time and effort. And also, everybody here should care about this. It's hurting the integrity of our field. So here's the message you'll all see in the airport when you're coming and going here, but I think we need to embrace it here in our own community. And if we don't, I think we're gonna wish we did. If you see something, say something, right? If you see bad behavior, pull aside the person and say, hey, look, here's how to do it right. Recently, I became familiar with a case where a very impressive appearing student was expelled for behavior that the student tried to justify by saying, nobody at my school taught us morals or values. This happened to be a student from a very large, well-known Chinese school that I was shocked to hear that they thought this was justifiable behavior there. Let me just be very clear, most Chinese who I know are extremely honest and morally upright. I hope this is an exception. If they hadn't said that it was a general thing over there, I wouldn't have quoted it this way. But I want to be clear, if any of you here come from schools like that, where you haven't heard that, I think this may be kind of the new generation, that our community sees that kind of behavior as dishonest and unethical, whether or not your school taught you that. So using AI to generate fabricated results, fake data, and publications containing these, and presenting them as real is not right? Obviously, we use these generative things to make all kinds of cool things, even to improve training sets, but to pass it off as something that it's not, we have to draw a line and say in our community what we're going to tolerate, and we have to educate people to be better about this. I think I've heard from some, they're pressured to optimize their resume. Sure, we all want to optimize our resume and our careers, but think about constrained optimization, right? Optimize, but constraining your integrity. Don't let your integrity be reduced. Your integrity matters more than any impressive thing that you can put on your resume. So when you're optimizing your life, your resume or whatever, make sure that it's a constrained optimization. Don't give up on don't reduce your integrity. All right, another area I think we have to watch out for is, hey, we call it hallucinations, sounds kind of charming and harmless, but really the world knows there's just a lot of errors. Some are calling them lies. There's, as we're seeing, even AI-generated research papers and reviews. I think we'd all like to think we're going to solve this with the next generation. It's going to go down. Don't worry about this, Roz. We'll solve it. There's a lot of great work working on solving it. I'm actually usually an optimist on these things, but in this case, I'm worried. And I'm worried because I'm old enough to have seen what happened with the internet in the early days. And so what I actually worry is going to happen is people are going to pile on and start using these big time, and that will bring in a lot more bad actors. I think people in this community are mostly very good, but we're getting a lot more people coming in on this, and I think it's going to go up. In fact, I think it's probably not going to be this linear. I think it's going to be more of a hockey stick, but we'll keep it linear for now because I'm an optimist. And what happens to our reputations when this happens? Well, they go down. So in fact, if you look at the least trusted professions in the USA, this is data from last year, the members of Congress are at the bottom, 8%. This is in the US. I don't know here in Canada or wherever others of you are from. Car salespeople always used to be at the bottom, but senators are matching them now. Next to them is business executives. I was surprised to see this so low. All of you want to be entrepreneurs. Engineers are actually not so bad. We're way up there above dentists, and but below nurses. Now, where are those of us making AI? I think we're probably here right now, but we are, and I would like to think we're going to increase, okay, go up, or let's be unbiased and just say we don't know which way we're going to move. But when I look at what a lot of behavior is being tolerated right now, if we don't do something about it, then I worry it's going to drop. I worry that it could drop at least down to where the business executives are, right? Some of you have seen this behavior if you're in the Valley. Now, there's a problem a lot of smart people have, and that is that we say things and we're very careful with our words, but we don't realize that the people listening we don't show what's called theory of mind. We don't show understanding of what they're likely to hear when we say certain things, all right? So you might complain about this next image, but this is an example of people saying carefully one thing and people hearing another. Many leaders have said things like this: AI may replace 50% of all jobs in the next 3 years. What are people hearing? Regular people out there. And if you don't know regular people in your life, then over the holidays you have another homework assignment. Get out and meet some normal people, not just fellow AI researchers. We're kind of normal, but expand. They're hearing people are becoming worthless. They're worried about this. And I've actually even heard AI researchers worried about this. Let's talk about this. Is this the kind of future we want? I don't think so. I think this is not the optimal way to benefit human lives. We have a choice. We don't have to make this future. This is a room full of brilliant people who can make just about any kind of future. I would really like to encourage people to talk about this and think about how to not do this. Now, you might say, oh, that's just one or two. Well, Here's an ad that's in San Francisco, evidently this week, that's saying stop hiring humans. I'm not going to put up the name of the company. They don't need extra advertising. But it's generating, even in a city that's very tech-friendly, attitudes of AI people hate people, right? They're giving the finger to artists, writers, designers, jobs, everybody. We're getting a bad name. It's stoking anger against us. And we, again, have a choice to not let this happen. I don't know how many of you saw years ago the movie, Kubrick started it, the movie AI, and handed it off to Spielberg when he passed away. But in the movie AI, there are these things called flesh fairs, where people who hate AI go and they melt down the robots. This kind of sentiment, I fear, is growing. And we know how impressive AI is. You just heard, if you were here for the last session, super intelligence is inevitable. Well, we can argue about that, or what it actually should be, because we're the ones building it. But I want to say, let's not misuse it in ways that devalue human beings. For example, when AI is impressive, give the credit to its makers. Like we were just giving the credit to the Test of Time people who described the process they went through to make their amazing AI advances. That's an excellent example of what I'm talking about here. Now, when people talk to the public, though, sometimes we're pretty sloppy, or the press, of course, they want it short. So it's more catchy if they say AI invented the new molecule. Now, that's a super amazing accomplishment. And AlphaFold, and these things are super amazing, wonderful AI things I think we can all be incredibly proud of. The truth is, it was a lot of work by a team of people, right? And I put up several mouthfuls of that here, optimizing and iterating. And don't forget the people who did the smartly designed hardware and, worked with the team to optimize their design criteria and come up with what would really succeed and be meaningful. And so they've made amazing discoveries. I know the press won't write the full description, but they could say visionary people created and used AI to invent a new molecule. All of us, when we're talking to the public, could be a lot more careful about our language and making sure that it is giving proper credit to the human beings who are making the impressive contributions. All right, a very brief little bit here. I don't know how many of you know what ontology is, so I'll just mention it is a whole branch of metaphysics. It deals with the nature of being. Just going to have one slide about it. When you have offspring, and I have 3 sons, they will, at points during their life, be inferior to you in some of the things they can do. Other points in their life, they will be superior to you in some of the things they can do. In fact, all of us have some things we can do that are superior or inferior to others. But when it comes to ontological nature, we are equivalent to those whom we beget. We are ontologically equivalent as human beings. And however, when we make something, we are ontologically superior to what we make. This is an important distinction, I think, for AI. We can make an AI. I show Hiroshi Ishiguro here with his robot that looks like him and probably is increasingly able to sound and act like him. Cynthia Brazil with the first Kismet and other things. They're amazing achievements, and they may surpass us in some kinds of functionality. But it doesn't make them superior to us in all ways. They're superior in a particular functionality. We are, as their maker, ontologically superior to what we make. Along with this message is a message that every human being in this room, and maybe there's some AIs in here masking us as humans, but all of you have human worth. And that is not based on your functioning, on whether or not your NeurIPS paper got spotlighted as a poster, whether or not it got in. It's not based on your brains, your accomplishments, your financial worth, your connections, your health, or anything on your resume. You have worth just because you are a human being. All right, to wrap up, I want to say a little bit more about how we can do better than optimizing the way we just usually think about optimizing AI. I think we can be optimizing for what makes people's lives better. Earlier this week, Fei talked a keynote about AI to augment people. Yes, it augments us, but I think we have to raise the bar higher than that, or we're going to see a lot of the problems expand that I expressed concern about. We have to proactively look for good ways to improve people's lives. There's a lot of theory out there from positive psychology, how to do this. Won't go into it in detail. I'll give you two examples. One from Marty Seligman, where you don't just optimize happiness, positive emotions, or engagement, that hooks people on clicking or engages them hopefully in something more worthy. But you try to optimize, or achievement, which AI does wonderfully, right? Already today, amazing ways it's helping us all achieve more, which is good for human flourishing. Okay, so let me just emphasize there are really great ways AI is promoting human flourishing today with positive emotions, achievement, and some kinds of engagement. Where I think we could do a whole lot more is with human relationships and meaning. They're super important, and we haven't been talking about them and doing them. Let me give you one example where instead of building a robot that just tries to help a child develop reading skills, literacy skills, our Media Lab Personal Robots group is working on a robot that brings you together with a person to do that better. This has the benefit not only of bolstering literacy skills, probably more than one-on-one with a personalized robot tutor, but also developing good human flourishing in a relationship. I noticed the kids also eating an apple, which looks like something a human might think of and bring also. Here's another example of a theory that we're using in our group from Carol Riff and team that informed Marty Seligman's positive flourishing theory, and this has some additional components. But the key thing I want to point out here is not each of these components, but that we are bringing these together with the people who are not flourishing, with people who are at risk of not flourishing. In this case, youth removed from their home in the child welfare system, who are being left behind by a lot of the advances in technology. So we bring them in, we teach them the technology, and we tell them, look, we want you to help shape the future and help us build a better future. And they have a lot of cool ideas, and they know what they need. The Media Lab as a whole is working to invent a better and more just future, not just us researchers saying what we think is best, not just the companies dictating what's going to make money, but working alongside, by, with, and for those who are in need, who are not flourishing or at risk of not flourishing. And here's an example with a QR code of a group from our first Fostering Futures Forum who gave a bunch of input as to things they would like to see developed to improve their future. All right, wrapping up here. This is a lot of work. There was that petition that was circulating not long ago to slow down AI by 6 months. Well, I got news for you. If you involve the people that you're trying to develop things for, it slows things down. It's a lot of work. It's kind of frustrating sometimes how much it slows it down, if you just are used to tooling away in the lab and controlling everything yourself, because this is uncontrolled. But it gets us to a better place. It is so worth it, and I encourage you to think more about involving the people that you're thinking you're designing for upfront in the process, so we all hopefully get to a better place. All right, before we shift to Q&A, because we're at the end of the session here, I want to counter what might be the most frequently asked question. It's the superintelligence question. Hey, let's just build AGI. It's all these comments, it will solve everything. You've heard all the hype, I'm sure. But people are noticeably sketchy on describing the kinds of solutions. And I don't know about you, but in my experience with each of these technologies, in addition to the new solutions, come a whole lot of new problems. In fact, as I started to think of them, they went absolutely, literally off the chart, off of my slide up above this. Really, people, let's use our super amazing brains to work together and think about this optimization, right? With pushing on this and getting good things here, there are going to be problems that crop up, and let's understand them. I'll end with just an example from Marvin Minsky, who passed away in 2016, one of the founding parents of the field of AI and one of my wonderful colleagues whom I miss. Here's a picture of us being friendly there. Marvin and I agreed on some things and disagreed on others. He thought the main focus should be maximizing intelligence, cognition. He thought bodies were like a mystery. Why do we need them? I should be a brain in a vat, he thought. We differ on that. He used to say that with the future of AI, what one might today call AGI, we will build something so intelligent that we'll be lucky if it keeps us around as household pets. Now, I want us to just think about this. It's easy to visualize now, thanks to generative AI. Do you want future humans to be treated like household pets? Really? Anybody raising their hand? Maybe there's a couple. Let me word that a little bit differently. Do you want future offspring to blame you for making them into household pets? I certainly don't. And yet, you know, one could imagine. So I want to close by just saying, I'm not going to tell you what's optimal, but I hope I've encouraged you to have some conversations about things that might be better than what we've just been letting happen. And hopefully that will involve people who are not flourishing or at risk of not flourishing, and innovating AI that improves human lives, that has a positive impact on people, not merely using people for usability tests or will they buy it, but really thinking long and hard with one another about what kind of future we want to create. This is the room that can do it. This is the room of most brilliant, amazing makers and inventors. And I hope you'll leave here and ask yourself how to optimize what matters most. Thank you.
I hear a lot of talk around here about like perception and cognition and reasoning, etc., which are basically technical terms of philosophy and psychology. We kind of don't discuss what they mean there. We also don't put a concrete definition of what we mean. We basically mostly mean an empirical measure of intelligence or reasoning. And I think this, relates really highly with what you're saying about paying attention to what we're saying, or like what we actually mean and what people hear. So I feel that it's really beneficial to read into psychology or philosophy to, do what you're saying we should be doing. I just wanted to ask, do you have any readings or books or anything that you could recommend to like an average hyped up AI researcher?
Great question. I didn't bring a reading list with me. I'm happy to talk afterwards with some ideas. I also encourage you to talk to people from other fields and ask them what they're perceiving that we're saying when we make our claims about what AI does, and then ask them where they get that idea from. I think listening to them and learning their point of view and bringing it back to AI research may help us all.
Yeah, thank you very much. It was a really intriguing talk. So yesterday, a very well-known chief scientist in industry has said that libraries and other cultural institutions like museums should willingly provide their data to train AI models. Otherwise, their cultural heritage would get forgotten eventually. Do you agree with that? And if not, how should we balance or even safeguard culturally sensitive data or any other valuable data for that matter for getting used in commercial AI?
I think I should defer that to the Google Books people, who I think have already done that, right? Some of them are probably here. That's not an area of my expertise, but I certainly do think it's a very sensitive area. And I'm not, it's funny, people talk about taking land. It's something you hear when we're here in Canada and other places where there were other people who had land that was taken from them. I think we have to be very careful that we don't become that AI researchers don't become the people viewed as the bad guys who just decided we were entitled to everybody's hard work efforts and, using language like you just used. I find that language a bit difficult.
Hi, thank you for a wonderful talk. Gave us a lot to think about. I was wondering, when you talked about your framework for human flourishing, it connected with me in terms of applications that can be there for AI. A lot of work here is like what I believe is like platforms that enable those applications or many other diverse set of applications like large language models. Is there any work or any guidance on how do we distill those 5 attributes down to the platform, which is much more general?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think, when I put up the schematic of a lot of the stages of machine learning, I think you almost have to go stage by stage and ask. So for example, if you go to the data collection stage, you ask questions about like, what does sharing this data do to people, right? What does, are we collecting the kind of data that when it outputs this is going to improve people's mental health or make it worse? Right? You may want to collect it either way, but it would be really good if we knew upfront the potential harms there. And today we do have a lot of worries about these potential harms, right? So instead of just like shoving all the data in and saying, oh, let the lawyers deal with that, why don't we think intelligently about what the potential harms would be and try to design a little bit more carefully upfront what goes into it. Also, we might wind up with leaner models that have guardrails built in because we were smart about the data sets. So that's just one example where those principles could be applied to one stage of it. But I think it's going to take, a lot more work for all of us to have conversations to figure out how to do this.
Ros, following up that question on data, there are quite a lot of questions on Slido as well, and I just wanted to follow up with there's a couple of questions I wanted you to weigh in on. One is the question about ground truth and emotions used to train models, and how do we, with emotions, how do you ascertain ground truth in the data collection process, and how do we get suitable data? Another question around wearable technology and the huge potential to help patients is also that of surveillance as well, and how can you prevent the dangers of these technologies as well?
Yeah. Thanks. Very briefly, I'll start with the latter. We do everything involving human data with an ethics review board first in place before we even advertise for people to participate. So there are extensive ways that we cover data privacy, security, and so forth. With emotion ground truth, that's a really hard question. The psychologists will tell you it's what people say they feel. But I have found, especially in the computer science and AI community, a lot of people don't know what they feel. We have a high percentage of people who have what's called alexithymia, where they just usually don't feel much of anything until things get really extreme, and then they know what they feel. So they're not very good at self-reported ground truth. In cases like that, what we do is we try to build situations that are more likely to elicit a certain kind of ground truth, like I showed you the CAPTCHA example, where we deliberately tried to elicit frustration. We also have people labeling the data. So we usually look for converging kinds of ground truth to try to boost the expectation that the label might be believable. We also add label noise. There are lots of ways to look at this, and it's hard.
Thanks for the good talk and uncovering the bad practices in AI research and raise awareness to preserve the reputation of this community as a whole. But just throughout the presentation, I noticed that there's only one slide where you explicitly mentioned the nationality of the researcher. That's about the Chinese students. But you also put a note that most of the Chinese students you met are honest and upright. So I just have this question. Is it because most of the Chinese students are very good, which caused the fact that whenever you notice one or two bad people, that nationality especially caught your attention there? Because there are other bad practices you mentioned, but they didn't mention the nationality there.
Yeah.
I
hope that's true. I hope that's true. Let me clarify on that one. That was not based on my judgment. That was based on the student's quote saying that the school was not teaching it, which meant that it applied to a lot of people from there. I have not seen that. I put what I have seen, which is all the Chinese people I've worked with have it with actually the one exception I mentioned have been wonderful. So I'm very happy, pro, and maybe that's it. Maybe this one, maybe their comment was, who knows what. I hope it was an outlier.
Yeah, thanks for that clarification. I think that's also probably showing that these students are upright and honest so that they give you this reflection. But still, I personally, as a Chinese, find that a bit offensive because that's the only place where you explicitly mention nationality, although you've mentioned a lot of bad practices. I think it's important that we preserve a good reputation outside this community, but within this community, we also raise awareness on unconscious bias and probably this racist problem. I hope in the future, if you present this again, you can remove that nationality note because that seems unfair for this special group of people.
Thank you so much for speaking up about that, and I think I will take your advice and remove it.